showing. As you just saw, this meeting will be recorded, so keep that in mind as you're turning on your videos. Great. So as more people begin to enter the room and as we're seeing some introductions pop up in the chat, it is my pleasure to begin introducing our group of speakers for this month's gathering for the Just Transition Collective. This week, we are going to be speaking about housing justice. As you all may know, there is a housing crisis going on across the nation, but is particularly hitting our state and definitely in our rural communities as well. And so we are very interested to hear from folks who have been working in housing justice in Alaska, and particularly with cold climate housing, and with our queer youth, to talk about their various different projects. And without further ado, I will start to pass it off to some of our speakers. They'll give us a few minutes introduction and presentation, and then we'll be able to get into some discussion. So just a quick land acknowledgement before we do that. The Just Transition Collective works throughout the unceded territories of the Indigenous peoples of Alaska. And we strive to carry out our work with a commitment to the HAMES principles for democratic organizing, as well as the Defend the Sacred principles. If you haven't seen those, I would strongly encourage to look them up and add them to your repertoire. So we will start today with Mindy O'Neill from the Cold Climate Housing Research Center. Mindy, take it away.
Hi, Michaela. Thanks everybody for being here. That doesn't look like the right screen. Are you seeing my presentation? Or are you seeing a bunch of files? Files. That's great. Great way to start. Let's try this again. How about now?
Looks good.
Like my presentation. Okay, great. Well, thanks for holding this. My name's Mindy O'Neill. I'm the executive director of the Cold Climate Housing Research Center. We're located on the Tanana Dene lands in Fairbanks. And I wanted to just show today a broad overview of how housing is related to Alaska's economy. We really believe that the biggest economic challenge in Alaska is housing. With adequate housing, we strengthen the economy, we enhance our quality of life, and we improve communities across the state. Cold Climate is embarking on their 25th year as a nonprofit, and we were based out of the home builders. Builders who were looking at design techniques of residential homes and saying, there's a better way to do this for cold climates. And over the 25 years, we've expanded our reach into rural Alaska, working with communities in an approach that we call a holistic approach. And so really coming into communities when we're asked to coming in with an open mind of an evaluation of how the land is used, what traditional knowledge exists, and how the land is changing, and how individuals are using their homes. And then we take that information and design residential homes that meet the demands of those particular challenges or issues for that community. And so we offer a few main programs that we have here, anything from building sciences, this is kind of the guts of your house, from building envelopes, foundations, and heating systems. We advocate for good policy, housing policy, energy efficiency policy. Again, the holistic approach technique that we have is in our Sustainable Northern Communities program. And then we have a fairly robust building education and outreach program that we continue to grow throughout the state and virtually online. So what are some of the housing injustices in Alaska? So the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation does this housing assessment every year, or every 4 years, I believe is what they're mandated to do. So right now they're currently reevaluating with current statistics. So the last one we have is from 2018. And what it finds is that more than half of rural homes are overcrowded. We have a real problem with energy inefficiency throughout the state. It's very expensive to build here. That's certainly been exacerbated by the pandemic and the lack of materials and resources that we have. And we're generally just not building enough houses, even for people who are coming into the state, as well as those who are suffering from some of these other issues. And so by a conservative estimate, we believe that 55,000 homes are needed throughout the state by 2025. That's coming up very soon. And in order to do that, it would, with the pace that we're building homes today, it would take over 183 years to meet that demand. So we have, I guess, what would be rightly defined as a crisis on our hands. An impact of inadequate housing is related to health, and I really think this is an issue that is underrepresented in the housing conversation. I think that the way our homes, we live in our homes, we spend the most time in our homes, maybe other than work, and certainly if we're working from home, then you're at home all the time. And how our homes react to the living environment with having humans inside of it certainly impacts our health. Children have some of the highest respiratory diseases in the state of Alaska, and it can be directly attributed to a lack of ventilation and poor air quality in their homes. And then some of the other things that we don't necessarily think about is the mental health implications, houselessness of overcrowding, how housing can affect crime if someone doesn't have a house. The elderly population is a consideration here, as well as how climate change is affecting our homes across the state. And we're certainly seeing that everywhere. I think it's interesting to note the statistics about how housing reduces recidivism in prisons, and how it actually, by providing housing to residents in the state, we reduce the need of spending money on incarcerated individuals. And just to note that the Healthy Alaskans 2030 priority did identify several areas where housing related to health. So we look at housing as like, what sort of sustainable resources do we have in this vast state that we have right here in our backyard that we can make and build houses from? And so we think about it in these sort of general buckets of timber, gravel, natural land resources, and this emerging technology of kelp and other maritime agricultural projects. There's some really cool stuff happening in Southeast Alaska that could be applicable to building homes that are healthy and reduce the supply chain demand. And so this just kind of shows some of the opportunities that we're looking at and how we can take raw materials from Alaska, support a manufacturing idea or a manufacturing industry here in Alaska, and then partner with individuals, organizations, nonprofits who are working directly in rural Alaska as well as urban Alaska to build housing that really meets the needs of communities. So energy efficiency is certainly a part of that. Obviously, everybody knows that we're spending in the study 5 times more than the average American on energy efficiency. And so we promote ways that we can make our housing more efficient as well as new construction. I find this really interesting that the rental costs throughout the state are higher than what the average earning wage of a renting family. And so that really just speaks to how we're keeping we're keeping a sector of our public in a rental space that they can't afford. And it's you know, there's a couple of ways to address that, I think, but it's a statistic that doesn't get talked about enough. One of the projects that we released recently was this health and safety considerations in new construction, and it's divided into 4 different sectors of what to consider when you're building a new house. And you know, I think some when we're talking about housing, I had a real aha moment last week at the Arctic Encounter Symposium. We were talking about housing and, you know, like the foundation and how this is going to work with changing permafrost and whatever. And it occurred to me that, you know, in a lot of communities, they don't even have a survey. They don't even know where you can build. They don't know who owns that land. And so we really do take for granted in urban areas just the fact that we have a plot that we can build on, even if there are regulations that we have to work within. So we really try to ground ourselves in that work, and that communities all across the state are not equal in that regard. And so just to reiterate, you know, we really believe housing strengthens the economy, enhances quality of life, and improves our communities. I do have some slides that talk to our projects, but I think we have a full panel today. So I'll save those for now, and apologize in advance that I have to jump off at 1 o'clock, but really appreciate the opportunity to share our work here today and being a part of this discussion. It's super important. Thanks. Back to you, Michaela.
Thanks so much, Mindy. Yeah, I learned quite a few things from that presentation, and I have some questions stacked up in my mind too. So hopefully we can get to those before you leave at 1. But for now, I'll pass it off to our next speaker. We have Owen Hutchinson from the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. Thanks, Owen, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to see so many people joining us today during their lunch hour. And I just want to thank people for taking a moment. I don't have a presentation. I'm going to try and be short so that there could be time for comments. And I'm going to cover a lot. And I will try not to use too many acronyms. I grew up in Juneau, Alaska, and I got into housing work through domestic violence and sexual assault response at AWARE, which provides emergency shelter from people fleeing intimate personal violence. And I didn't realize at the time that that was a housing issue and who had access to housing, and specifically housing affordability. About 2 years ago, I started working with the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. And primarily I work on our state legislative priorities with our sister coalition, the Alaska Coalition on Housing and Homelessness. And together we are the 2 continuums of care for homelessness services in the state of Alaska. Nationally, there are 400 COCs, but of course, Alaska has the largest geographic area, and it's wild that we have one that covers the entire state. And that staff is responsible for ensuring housing services in every community in Alaska outside of Anchorage. I also come from a harm reduction background, and housing is absolutely a form of harm reduction for people in active substance misuse or for active kind of mental health issues or experiencing serious mental illness. And I also work with LGBTQI2S+ advocacy, specifically kind of healthcare, and thinking about how certain groups are overrepresented in housing instability circles. ACH's role as a COCs are required federally to do some things, manage a data system to report to the federal government how their housing activities and federal money is being spent and the outcomes from those programs. So the placements into permanent housing after accessing resources through those programs. We're also required to do something called coordinated entry. So every COC creates a system for determining an individual's vulnerabilities, and that puts them in a priority list for housing. So if somebody is disabled, elderly, there's a bunch of different factors that go into determining vulnerability, and it's a very fraught and difficult thing to do, and often happens inequitably, or the housing placements are inequitable, not necessarily the prioritization. But every community needs to have this list so that when a unit is available, we can match someone quickly to a unit that's appropriate for their needs. And then we report that data to the federal government, it's audited, and we also do community planning. So the state COC does community planning in every community, and the Anchorage COC does it for the Anchorage area. In terms of state advocacy, the two coalitions are really focused on a couple things right now: special needs housing grants, which come through AHFC, and they provide permanent supportive housing for beneficiaries of the Alaska Mental Health Trust. I was super happy that Mindy put up that State Department of Health strategic plan that lists housing. The Mental Health Trust also names housing as a priority. The governor's task force on sex trafficking says safe and affordable housing is one of the #1 things you could do to reduce sex trafficking. And the Office of Management and Budget released a report showing API, Alaska Psychiatric Institute, costs $1,400 a day. Jail costs $153 at the time. It's now $179 because of inflation, and permanent supportive housing costs $52 a day. These are all state organizations saying the same thing essentially, and yet there continues to be inaction from our state delegation regarding kind of wise investments. We know that permanent supportive housing is a wise investment, and yet it's stayed flat funded for 10 years. So when we hear a lot about the BSA being flat funded and not inflationed, well, and the services go down, the same thing has happened in our special needs housing grants. The other program is the Basic Homeless Assistance Program, BAP. Oh, SNUG is special needs housing grants, BHAP, which I also call BAP. And those fund things like crisis lines. When a family literally has nowhere to go in the middle of the night, if they are in Nome, there is a phone number they can dial in their community and get access to like a hotel room or an emergency shelter that's appropriate for children. And both of those programs have been flat funded. So that's a major priority for us, is like advocacy around the importance of those programs and really illustrating to legislators like why investments in those programs make sense. And that they complement federal investments, specifically the permanent supportive housing programs. We also last year undertook initiating a state housing trust. We were one of 3 states without a state housing trust. 47 states had one, 6 were unfunded, but the whole idea of a state housing trust is that it can leverage federal money, state money. Ours can leverage philanthropic money because it's held outside of state government at the Alaska Community Foundation. And so there can be corporate investments, and that people can apply for grants to develop in places where it's really expensive to develop. In Nome, they are building 15 units of permanent supportive housing to the tune of $12 million. In Bethel, they're building 24 at Bethel Winter House, which is attached to their homeless shelter, for about $6 million. Part of why it's cheaper there is the land is incorporated with the Bethel Winter House, and there's a bunch of other reasons. The city's donated utilities, and they've been really wise about kind of that construction project. And the Nome project has 28 fund sources. So if you imagine reporting for one grant for your organization, imagine reporting 28 different grants. It's a major achievement to have 15 units of permanent supportive housing in Nome. But the idea of a state housing trust is it can reduce the number of funds somebody would have to apply to, or if they're missing a little bit to get a project rolling, so, the state housing trust could step in and provide that funding. That's called Housing Alaskans, a public-private partnership, and there's a website We have a board of directors now and an advisory committee, but grants haven't started going out because it's a very new entity. And then on the federal side, Alaska's really disadvantaged because overcrowding and doubling up does not considered homeless. And we have the highest rates of overcrowding in the country, as Mindy pointed out, and yet it's considered category 3 homelessness, which is not applicable for any HUD funding. So any HUD program cannot screen people in to get them access to prevention, diversion, rapid rehousing, or transitional housing programs simply by the definition of homelessness that the federal government uses. And then finally, the funding formula goes by overall population, which Alaska will always lose at. In Anchorage, we have about 3,000 people experiencing homelessness, and that's the same amount as Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas receives $45 million a year from HUD, and we receive $4 million because of the number of people in the Houston metro area, and that gets like a 50% weighted grade on the grants through HUD. So we're really working at the federal level to change the funding formulas and the definitions, both so that HUD can understand the extent of the problem in Alaska, which is enormous and increases the more rural you get, but also that we can try to bring more resources to a problem that is so significant. And I think that's my quick pitch. I'm trying to be super speedy and look forward to if we have time for conversation later.
Thanks so much, Owen. Yeah, you were very speedy, but in a good way. And
I could talk a lot about this stuff.
I really appreciate you talking about your campaigns, and I think that that's the point of these calls, is to be able to connect folks who care about the same issues to work together on advocacy, on building solutions. So
I was super happy to see Carol Treem in the audience, because I think she presented to the Housing Alaskans board yesterday. So it's nice to be like in a space with people who are thinking about this and active in this space, and even just to be able to make connections with people. So thanks for hosting us.
All right. Next, we will have a presentation from Hannah Hill from the Breadline.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Yes, I'm Hannah. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the director of the Breadline, which is an anti-hunger organization here in Fairbanks. We're on the unceded and traditional lands of Lower Tanana Dene people. And I am really grateful to be here and to have this opportunity to talk to all of you today. I want to say thank you also for making time to lunch and learn together. So the Breadline runs a weekday soup kitchen and a culinary job training program, a community garden, and loads of other projects with the mission of feeding people and affirming lives. So while we're not in the housing world directly itself, we do daily direct service with people who are unhoused. These are our friends and our families, and they deserve so much better than what is happening right now. It's our core belief here that we are always stronger together, and we operate with values of mutual aid and commitment to our whole community. So it's my opinion that homelessness is absolutely a crime of society. Society decides who deserves housing and who does not, and then lays that blame oftentimes at the feet of people who are actively being harmed by ideals of capitalist greed and, honestly, white supremacy. In Alaska, Indigenous people are vastly overrepresented in unhoused demographics. Native people are homeless on their own stolen lands here. The most recent data for the statewide point-in-time count, which is an annual count of sheltered and unsheltered people who are experiencing homelessness on a single night in January, that count clocks Indigenous people as over 43% of Alaska's unhoused population, despite making up just under 16% of the state's overall demographics. Outside of natural disasters or war, there is no evidence that mass homelessness existed anywhere in North America prior to European colonization. Broadly, Indigenous nations held land and housing in common, unlike the feudal systems of Europe, where royalty owned all the land and doled out the use as they see fit. Colonization and its accompanying genocide established private property rights in America, and this is the right to withhold resources from others. And this is how we still do housing today. Now, we often moralize and point to behaviors that are clearly the result of myriad trauma as the cause of homelessness. We blame drugs and drinking and laziness and mental health, but there's exactly one cause of homelessness, and that is the injustice of a lack of accessible housing. So nearly all of us are closer to homelessness than we are to being a millionaire. And like all things unjust, people who are already marginalized are most likely to become homeless. This is our elders, folks with disabilities, Black, Brown, Indigenous people, queer youth, veterans, domestic violence survivors, people with mental illness. To that last point, people who struggle with mental illness are at a significantly higher risk of becoming homeless. Numerous studies show that maybe about 1/3 of people who are homeless have severe and often untreated mental illness. As one example of this, schizophrenia affects a little over 1% of the US population at large, but there are estimates suggesting that the rate could be upwards of 20% in unhoused populations. So when people have psychiatric symptoms that include hallucinations and delusions, disordered speech, and other behaviors that are difficult to manage, they also struggle to keep healthy relationships in their communities. They struggle to access appropriate treatment, to maintain medical regimens, keep employment, right? Ergo, housing. So there's a lot of ignorant narratives around scary homeless people, but the truth is that people who are experiencing homelessness are significantly more likely to be a victim of violent crime than to commit one. So to that, homelessness itself is trauma. Being unhoused is a personal crisis, and the longer traumatic stress goes on, the more likely a person is to develop serious mental health issues, and that compounds everything. Being homeless is stressful and dangerous and humiliating and exhausting. Fairbanks, here where I live, is the coldest city, over 25,000 people in the United States. There's an estimated 50 to 100 unsheltered people who live in Fairbanks, but many more who are homeless, but somehow sheltered on any given day. And right now in Fairbanks, there is no official cold weather plan. There is no low barrier shelter, and very few accessible places for people to get warm safely. Our public library, which arguably is the largest social service institution in Fairbanks right now, is about to close for 10 months, starting on the 1st of May. That's about the only place where some people can go to just exist inside without having to pay for something. Here in Fairbanks, people who cannot or will not go to the only shelter in this town sometimes walk all night trying to stave off frostbite. They crowd into motel rooms, 10 at a time. They build camps in the woods and dig snow caves. They squat in abandoned houses, sleep in cars. There's a laundromat next door to us that burned 2 years ago. People sleep in there sometimes because it is, as they tell me, the best option they have. People die every year in Fairbanks, preventable deaths, because the city does not provide adequate resources for its citizens. So there's a phrase thrown around a lot of times in conversations about poverty that is a personal pet peeve of mine, and this is bootstrapping. It's the inability of someone to pull themselves up by their bootstraps is framed as a moral failure of that individual, even though it's an impossible task. The earliest use of this phrase came from a physics textbook from the late 1800s, and it asked, why cannot a man lift himself up by pulling on his bootstraps? It's like, go ahead and try. You can try and pull yourself up all day long. You can't, because it's against the physical laws of our universe. Newton's second law, specifically. No one can. We all need each other's help to thrive. So many of these social services in Alaska, the nonprofits, do phenomenal work in the face of these Herculean odds, and yet are continually asked to do more with less. Even so, giving places like soup kitchens or emergency shelters are only harm reduction measures. They're not permanent solutions. So ultimately, one thing solves homelessness, and that's housing. Evidence proves that people who are homeless can find stability and healing when provided with empowering supports that are focused on housing and wraparound support. Housing First is an effective, recovery-oriented, evidence-based model that works. It's a community approach that acknowledges the complexities of addiction and trauma and mental illness and many, many, many challenges that come with experiencing homelessness, but it also acknowledges that addressing these challenges while living on the streets or in unsafe or unstable situations is a catch-22. Who could do that? I don't know. We have one such low barrier program in Fairbanks, and their wait list is just absolutely packed booked. People who have been chronically homeless require oftentimes a permanent supportive housing due to trauma, mental and physical illness, or addictions, whatever. They deserve immediate and safe shelter, safety, physical safety as much as anyone else. So while we can and must treat the symptoms of homelessness every day, we also need to dig into its ugly roots, which are poverty and inequality, class division, and ignorance. And we can do this by listening to and learning from each other. I think primarily those of us who are not or have not experienced homelessness need to build community with those who have and are. There's an old rabble-rousing saying that's nothing about us without us. And folks who are living unhoused know best what they need and deserve to be listened to. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. That was really powerful. I think we need to recognize the individual people who are experiencing houselessness and how that connects to the structural issues of white supremacy and colonialism. Our real solutions have to have those in mind. So I really appreciate that context that you brought. Next, we will move to Deani Chapman with Alaska Environment. Thanks so much for your presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Deani Chapman. I'm the State Director for Alaska Environment. I live and work on Dena'ina lands in Anchorage. Alaska Environment is a statewide member-based environmental organization, and we work on issues to protect air and water, a livable climate, and land. And the thing that I'm going to talk about today is some of our work around clean energy homes, which plays into this conversation because it helps people's existing homes become healthier, more sustainable, less expensive to keep comfortable, and just generally adequate. And then it also helps new homes that are being built be sustainable, healthy, and less expensive to maintain. So over the last couple of years, Congress and President Biden have passed some significant legislation, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. And this legislation dedicates historic funding to clean energy proliferation, weatherization, electrification, and more. And the programs are designed to help make these technologies available to people across income ranges, including renters. And one of our current priorities is to make sure that as many folks in Alaska as possible know how to and can take advantage of this funding. This will help us reduce our greenhouse gas pollution, make our homes more sustainable, and most relevant to this conversation, it will also help Alaskans make their homes more comfortable and then help them save money on their energy bills every single month. This is part of some broader work that we're doing with a coalition of organizations, including ACPERG, the Alaska Center, Susitna River Coalition, Native Movement, and Alaska Version 3, to ensure that Alaska comes out of infrastructure building years with better and more sustainable energy, transportation, et cetera. So the thing that I wanted to spend time on today was just giving some information on weatherization and electrification opportunities that are going to become available next spring. And some of it's a little wonky, but I'll do my best to keep it all clear and simple. So first, just a little on efficiency and electrification and why they matter before diving into the summaries of the programs that are going to become available. So we always say that the cleanest energy is the energy that you don't use, aka efficiency. And then efficiency is also really important because it can do a huge amount to save families money every single month and help people keep their homes consistently comfortable, even if their homes aren't quite up to what they should be. And there are several ways to increase efficiency in homes that exist already. The first big category is weatherization work. And this includes the bucket of things that keep the heat that is generated inside of your home in your home for longer. And there's a lot of DIY type small projects like recaulking, hanging curtains, air seals, closing up leaks, etc. That folks who are even a little handy can take on themselves and can have a huge impact on how much energy it actually takes to keep your home comfortable. And then there are also bigger projects like adding in better windows or storm windows, replacing doors, adding additional insulation, which also can make a really big difference in this. And then efficiency can also come in another category of stuff like using power strips that can be easily turned off to reduce passive pull of electricity, and bigger things like replacing appliances with more efficient versions. So next, a little background on electrification. So it's the process of replacing appliances like heaters, stoves, dryers, hot water heaters, cars that run on gas, propane, and oil with electric versions. From an environmental perspective, this will allow more of our lives to run on renewable energy as our grids transition to renewable energy. And then this will also create savings for families because renewable energy is less expensive than finite fuels. So it'll make housing less expensive. So with that background information, there are two big rebate programs that came out of the Inflation Reduction Act to be aware of. And both of these programs are going to be administered by the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. And they're anticipating that the programs will become available in the spring of 2024. And in the meantime, they want feedback from the community and Alaskans on how we want these programs to be administered. And our coalition is planning to do some work to help facilitate opportunities to engage on that and to make sure that these programs are actually going to work for people. But you should definitely feel free to reach out directly if you have ideas about how that should happen to make sure these programs actually work well. And then a little bit about on the programs themselves. So the first one is the Homeowner Managing Energy Savings Rebate Program, also known as HOMES. And these rebates are determined by the energy savings of an entire house or an entire dwelling. This is also applicable to apartment buildings. The first step is getting energy audits to determine the energy use of a home and what projects will have the biggest impact. The program doesn't specify what kind of retrofits a home must do, but it can include things like replacing windows, replacing doors, insulation materials, etc. And the rebate amount is based off of how much improvement there is in energy use and then people's household income overall. And the way that the household income plays in is that folks are broken into two different categories: low to moderate income homes, or LMI homes, and then other households. And households are defined by the Inflation Reduction Act as an LMI household if the cumulative income is below 80% of the area median income, which sounds a little complicated, but what that means is if, say, the median income in an area is $80,000, an LMI home would be any household that makes less than $64,000 cumulatively. And then the largest rebates in this program will go to retrofits that lead to energy savings of more than 35%, which is a pretty significant decrease in how much energy you're using in your home. And LMI households can get either 80% of those projects covered or a max of $8,000 towards that. And then other households that don't qualify for that income piece can get 50% covered or a max of $4,000. And then if people do somewhere between 20 and 35% savings, they can do 80% or $4,000 and then 50% or $2,000 of what those projects look like as well. And then I think that one of the important things to be aware of with these rebates, which could be a significant barrier, is that initially with this, people will need to be able to cover the full cost of the project before the rebate actually comes in. And one of the things that would probably help more people take advantage is if there were safe financing options for people to use as well, so they don't have to have that lump sum available, because that'll be a big barrier for a lot of folks. I think that the other piece of that is that planning in advance and thinking, what am I going to do 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now, will also help people be able to take advantage of those programs. And one of the other big pieces that will help more folks take advantage of this and make it so that those rebates can go further is outside of major cities, communities who coordinate so that energy auditors, experts, and labor that are not available locally all come in at the same time to do this weatherization work for a whole bunch of different houses in the community will make those dollars go a lot further. So folks taking time to start organizing their communities now and figuring out when everyone is going to do this all at the same time will make a big difference. And then the other second big set of rebates that are coming in is the High Efficiency Electric Rebate Program. And this includes point of sale rebates, so meaning that people don't have to have the money up front for many of the purchases, which is great. And it includes things like replacing appliances, so heat pumps for for heat, water, clothes drying, electric/induction stoves, upgraded electrical delivery systems, insulation, all sorts of good stuff there. And then same thing, how much people can actually get from that is dependent on their income overall, and then how much savings it will actually produce. And then I mentioned before that one of our big objectives is making sure as many Alaskans take advantage of these rebates as possible. And our national team has already produced a set of general materials that folks can use to learn about do-it-yourself weatherization, heat pumps, solar panels, etc. And then I'm currently doing some work to add in Alaska-specific content to those materials. So how heat pumps work in different parts of the state, how much energy solar panels generate in different parts of the state in different seasons, etc. Cold Climate Research Center is on my list of folks to talk about with that actually. And then overall, those stories from community members will help folks make good decisions about what type of technology will actually work for their homes, and also inspire confidence in new appliances. So over the next several months, we'll hold webinars, supply fact sheets, and generally spread information about the programs and how folks can participate to upgrade their homes and make them more sustainable and more comfortable and less expensive to heat and maintain electricity in. And then I can put this in the list, but I have a link to the Home Energy Toolkit, which has a bunch of the general information, and I'll put that in the chat so folks can take a peek at that. Then I'll leave it at that. And thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about these things and hear about from all these other organizations.
Thanks, Deani. I will definitely have some questions when we get to the question and answer period. So, so that we can move toward that. Bye, Kenny. I am going to ask Terry to speak next and introduce themselves. We look forward to your presentation.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I am super grateful to be here. I haven't been able to talk in public for a while, and I've been feeling really, struggling, feeling bad about myself, but I'm not engaged. But I'm also like I'm spinning my wheels where I show up. It just feels really frustrating for me, but I'm super excited to hear what's going on. And I've been doing a lot of internal work this last few years. A long time ago, before I was homeless, I was a massage therapist, and I was an instructor around healing of Tai Chi, Qigong, and also physiology, because I have a certain amount of understanding of science and biology. And that practice served me well for those period of time of 10 years when I was houseless. I've been back here since 2018, and I started out really being more activist, and we had an encampment down at Valley of the Moon. I was so brokenhearted when all the people who wanted to help just like dropped out when the snow landed. And I watched a community be pushed again up against the elements they were trying to keep themselves safe from. And it's really interesting. It's like all of this talk about crime and toxicity and mental illness in the homeless community. And I want everybody to go turn that thumb back at ourselves. And I will point at myself too. I am now currently housed. I am now currently making money and I'm paying part of my rent here. And I'm just sitting with that, the monstrous impact I have, that if I don't go and have housing and I don't have a place to live, that I'm going to be chased by the police. And I'll be chased around here about the crime that's out on the houseless folks. I feel a lot more vulnerable than I ever did in Portland because I had a community of houseless people I lived with. We did our own security. We did our own looking out for each other. We did our own governance. And it's like people who have mental illness are totally capable of doing self-governance in a community and calling each other out and also letting each other be and minding our own business. And so I had this experience of being in community in a way that's profound. That I won't get if I had lots of money and I'm paying to go live with somebody in a collective housing thing. I have this whole financial burden of weight of a financial system interfering with my heart-to-heart connection with people. And so now I'm in this place here where there's a financial barrier of connecting. And it's really interesting to me sitting in this place here and then showing up as an artist. And I go and work with an agency and I'm here and it's like, oh, the people who work here don't feel safe with each other. They don't know how to go and connect with each other and create secure situations for each other and staff. What does that do for the people we're serving? And so like I'm just starting to see a really big, huge picture here of cruelty to all of ourselves. We are in a like what I want to call a social hypothermia. And it's like really devastating to our souls. And I don't know if I can speak for everybody, but I'm just saying for me, I'm experiencing that. And I'm going to go and talk with people who are organized around housing. I hear all the numbers and everything like that. And I was like, I know that whole place where all the numbers are. And it's just really like creating all kinds of frostbite on me in my heart. And that affects how I can show up and be present with people. And so I've been doing a lot of mindfulness work in the last year and a half. And there's a whole lot of thing about called like spiritual bypass going on there. And also at the same time, I have to go and like reckon with the fear I feel of being outside. To me, that's my answer about how I'm really stepping up. That's like when I'm ready to go be outside and just be outside and doing and connecting with people and sharing what I've always wanted to do is just share healing. And then recovering that sense of connectedness to the whole world is like a really big, huge madness going on. We are not separate from each other. We all breathing the same air. We're all breathing and drinking the same water. And some of us have money to create filters. And those filters, all the different filters keep us disconnected from the world. So I just want to share something really want to highlight something to encourage everybody to think about what is law and what is the thing of our soul must carry when we're walking through the world and living in an earth body. We spend a lot of time up here, not a lot of time in understanding what our bodies are and the capacities we have to live where we're at. Capacity we have to deal with like facing really difficult emotions, which I feel like really interesting barriers going on between organizations. So like why there isn't more coalition building. It's a lot about how we're dealing with conflict. Okay, this is just really quick. This is the Declaration of 4 Sacred Things. The earth is a living, conscious being in company with cultures of many different times and places. We name these things as sacred. The sacred air, the fire, the water, and the earth. Whether we see them as the breath, energy, blood, and body of the mother, or as the blessed gifts of a creator, or as the symbols of interconnected systems that sustain life, we know that nothing can live without them. To call these things sacred is to say that they have a value beyond their usefulness for human ends. That they have themselves become the standard by which our acts, our economies, our laws, and our purposes must be judged. No one has a right to appropriate them or profit from them at the expense of others. Any government that fails to protect them forfeits its legitimacy. All people, all living things are part of the earth life, and so are sacred. No one of us stands higher or lower than any other. Only justice can assure balance. Only ecological balance can sustain freedom. Only in freedom can that fifth sacred thing we call spirit flourish in its full diversity. To honor the sacred is to create conditions in which nourishment, sustenance, habitat, knowledge, freedom, and beauty can thrive. To honor the sacred is to make love possible. To this, I dedicate my curiosity and my will, and my courage and my silences, and my voices to this. I dedicate my life. And this is a declaration from Starhawk, somebody who in this country has done a lot of movement around permaculture, around community building, around how do you change your consciousness? So we're like really arguing a lot here, but like how do we remember that we both have some shared values, that we care about other people? And I think about where I'm coming from around how do I organize myself to go and fit with other people. And it's a difficulty for me getting back in the box. I don't want anybody to be in the box. This is a form of a whole imprisoned system, and I'm all about abolition. We have to free our hearts, and we have to free our minds and our spirits. And I know within this whole conversation, we're talking about home, but our social connections with each other are much more important than a structure. And if we don't connect that way, we won't make those structures that are going to work for each other. We have to have the structure in our hearts, in our connection with people. And I know this is the place where I'm preaching to, and y'all are here on the same page. But I want to encourage you with the idea about law and what is right. And like, take time. If you know you can go and step up and protest somewhere, do it. It's okay to fight. We're all connected. It's okay to fight. And it's okay to like make time to listen and hear underneath that. But sometimes you just have to really be out there, and people need to have the attention and say, no, this will not continue. This is wrong. Like, where do we stand up for that? Those are my questions out there. I don't know how much time I did. I think I'm done.
Yeah, that was really powerful though, Terry. I really appreciate it. And yeah, the issue that we're dealing with housing justice is at its core about disconnection between people, about not caring for community in the way that we should. And I really appreciate you bringing that to the forefront. Now, I know we're about to lose Mindy, so I was wondering, Mindy, if I could ask you a question before we move on to our last speaker. It's somewhat related because I think what Terry was talking about spirit and interconnectedness is really founded, we know, in a lot of Indigenous worldviews. And we use the term Remembering Forward and Just Transition Collective to recognize that we need to remember ways of being connected. We need to bring forward that Indigenous knowledge. And so my question for you from your presentation was that you talked about how the Cold Climate Housing Research Center does bring in traditional knowledge about Arctic living. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that before you hop off today.
Sure. Thank you for the question. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who presented today. I'm so inspired to be here with you. And it just really gives legitimacy to all of our work to be here together. So I'm moved. And I just want to say thanks for that. And thanks for holding the space. So how do we do that? First and foremost, we have to be invited into a community. We have to be asked to be there. And before that can happen, or once that happens, I guess, we really have to leave what we know in our own homes and go with an open mind of what we're going to learn. We know about technical stuff that hasn't changed much in the, since we've been constructing, right? But we acknowledge that we don't live in that community, in that location. We're not experiencing the environmental changes. We don't interact as a particular community may. And so in order to make the right design recommendations, we have to understand that. And so we do that with a, an approach of coming in and meeting the community where they are, holding a potlatch or holding some sort of gathering that we can talk about those issues, whatever it is that we're trying to solve. And then really being listeners in the work that is needed. Sometimes, well, lots of times we don't really know what we need, right? And so that's why we enlist the help of subject matter experts to make those recommendations based on what we think or what we know. And that's really where Cold Climate comes in as the team. And so it's listening. It's actually very simple. right? We complicate it, I think, sometimes in a lot of ways, but it's actually very simple of one, being invited, and two, listening, and then three, matching what we know as subject matter experts with what is really important to the community, and that meets their character.
Thanks, Mindy. All right, well, we appreciate you joining us today.
I'm so sorry I have to leave. This is the good, juicy part. So thanks, everybody. See you soon.
All righty, so our final speaker before we get to question and answer, I hope you all are thinking about your questions. We will have Aurora Roth from Chugach Ratepayers Association.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for having me and for having us. My counterpart, Gabby, is also going to be speaking and sharing about our work. And also, yeah, just thank you, Terry, for grounding us back in our hearts and in our bodies and in connection with each other. Yeah, just sitting with that. So thank you so much. So where we come in is that a part of being able to have stable housing and thrive in a community is to feel that you can afford your bills every month. So part of housing is paying for heat for your house and paying for electricity. When we look at our electricity bill, we typically don't think that we have any personal agency or collective agency over changing the numbers that we see on this bill. It's just what we have to pay to charge our phones and to turn the lights on. But, Alaska, we have some of the highest, electric rates in the country. And we saw with Mindy's presentation, some of the highest housing costs. And so our electric bills as a part of this housing cost is actually a huge equity issue of who can afford to live in our communities and to thrive here. What's interesting is that Alaska largely has what are called member-owned utility cooperatives. And this means that we actually do have agency over changing our electric bills and changing our energy system by getting to vote for the board of these electric utilities. And so that's what we're going to talk about in the next 5 to 10 minutes here about how we're doing that. And so that's why we started Chugach Ratepayers Alliance, and I'm going to hand it over to Gabby to kind of give more of a spiel, and then I'll pop back in too.
Yeah, thanks, Aurora. Hi, everybody. My name is Gabby. And just a little bit about why we decided to form Chugach Ratepayers Alliance, because there are a lot of groups that do work in the utility space. Our main goal is to kind of fill a storytelling niche. The more that I have learned about utilities, the more it amazes me that no one ever talks about them, especially just like in the general climate space. I don't see, I'm inspired by like making utilities a more mainstream thing that people like realize they have agency over and like realize can be a really direct way to take climate action. So as an organization, our number one goal is to educate ratepayers being member owners of a utility, kind of specifically Chugach Electric, because we are based in Anchorage on Dena'ina lands, and then build community around that education and around utility organizing. And specifically right now, we're really focused on getting the vote out for the upcoming Chugach Electric election for the board of directors, which opens on April 19th, just in a couple days here, and will be open for a month from April 19th to May 19th. So that is kind of like why we're here. And a little bit, I just want to give a little bit more background on Chugach Electric specifically. So Chugach serves all of Anchorage down to the northern Kenai Peninsula, I believe to Moose Pass. And they serve more members than any other utility in the state. And kind of because of that, and just because Alaska has such a small population in general, like Chugach Electric really holds a lot of sway in what our energy landscape looks like. And folks who are members of Chugach Electric really do hold almost an outsized like voting power to get leadership in Chugach that could potentially, they are not right now, but could potentially make moves towards making some big changes in what our grid looks like. And I think if Chugach were to make moves, it would make a really big impact on the state in general, which is why we're focused on that. So that is kind of the little background for why we're focused on Chugach. And I'm going to hand it back to Aurora to talk a little bit about the energy moment that we're in right now.
Yeah, so these elections happen for the board every year for Chugach Electric and for the other electric cooperatives around the state. But this year is particularly special, and like I feel and others in this space feel like this is the most important electric utility election that we have ever seen. And this is in part due to the fact that the rail belt, so between Anchorage to Fairbanks, that grid, is about to face an impending natural gas shortage. So some of you may have read articles and headlines that talk about this. And 80% of our electricity comes from natural gas in the Anchorage area and in the rail belt area. And Hillcorp, who provides a lot of that gas, has not guaranteed that they can provide gas past 2027 or 2028. And then Chugach Electric actually owns its own gas field, and that is coming to end of life in the 2030s. So we have, you know, if 80% of our electricity is produced by natural gas, we don't know basically after 2030 how we're going to produce electricity. The solutions that have been proposed so far include shipping in natural gas from other countries, either by boat or by truck, or putting in the Alaska gas line. And I feel like everybody in this room, I'm not going to go into background there, but like we absolutely cannot afford to do this from a climate standpoint and from an electric rates standpoint. If we do either of these options, our electric rates are going to increase drastically. And Renewable Energy Alaska Project has really amazing work and information on this and the economic analysis of this. So we're really have this immense opportunity with this gas crisis to completely transform our system and move towards a just transition and renewable energy in the South Central region. As some of the other speakers mentioned, we also have a lot of federal programs coming in right now with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act that has specifically set aside money for utilities to use to put in renewable energy. And so this is where the board comes in, is that we need people on the board, we need to elect people on the board that want to use these programs, that want to push for a just transition, that want to be leaders and not just be sitting idly by and trying to continue with the status quo. We cannot afford that as people paying electricity bills, and the climate cannot afford that with the increased carbon. I am not going to go too much more in depth. We had a longer presentation that we gave at an event recently, and we have that recorded. So we're going to drop the recording in the chat if you want more background on Chugach Electric, on their sustainability goals, and why voting in this election matters. I will say that electric cooperative elections have really low turnout compared to any other kind of election, less than 10% turnout. And what this means is that if we can get just a couple more thousand people to vote in this election, we can make a big difference. And so we need everybody on board to help get out the vote. And so even if you don't live in the Anchorage area, if you are not a member of Chugach and able to vote, we need your help in getting out the vote and telling everybody you know. So I'll put a plug for just watching our whole talk and getting more information. And there's also really interesting history on electric cooperatives as institutions, why our state has these institutions. And so you'll also learn about that if you watch the talk as well. Okay, I'll hand it back over to Gabby to give you specifics about the election.
Cool, yeah, so just really quickly, election one more time is from April 19th to May 19th. Anyone who receives a bill in the mail from Chugach Electric is a member and can vote. Voting happens online. It's super, super simple. We are supporting a slate of renewable energy candidates that's been nominated by a utility nomination committee from the Alaska Center. And those candidates are available on our Instagram page, on the Alaska Center's website, and also on our website. And I'll drop this all in the chat after. They are Jim Nordland, Suzanne Fleet Green, and Shana Kilcoyne. And I just want to touch really briefly, if you were to go in and read, there's a lot of people running for the board. If you were to go in and read about them, almost every one of them, mentions renewable energy and is talking about it. But the nomination committee has really decided that these folks have agreed to work together and are the most likely to actually make radical change, which is really what we need. So we're excited about supporting them. Yeah, and then one last thing about this election, as Aurora was saying, it's a really important one, especially because we do have the opportunity to form a renewable energy majority. There's 7 folks on the board and 3 of the seats are up for re-election. So if we were to fill them with a renewable energy slate, those 3 plus 1 person who's an incumbent who already supports renewables would give us 4 out of 7 who are really looking to make moves. So that'd be really exciting. Lastly, as I said in opening, we're really focused on education and storytelling, and Aurora likes to nerd out on utilities, and I really like to make content about it. We honestly like try and keep it pretty fun, and so I would totally encourage you to follow us on Instagram. We like to share lots of fun facts about cooking natural gas and other things. And then also, yeah, if you can vote in the Chugach area, we'd encourage you to do so and to get people you know to do so. That's really our main ask. Yeah, and then also Aurora and I are like, it's a pretty new organization. We just started doing this a couple months ago. So if you are involved in this work or want to learn more about what we're doing, what we're focused on, we are like totally would be really excited to talk to anyone. Yeah. And I think that's about all I got. Thanks so much for all your time. I've appreciated learning from you all. And yeah, I feel grateful for the space here. Aurora, did I miss anything? Yeah, cool. I'm going to drop our Instagram in the chat here, and then I think we're good to go. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Gabby and Aurora. Thanks specifically for your organizing. That is really important work, and sounds like achievable things. We just need to get a few thousand people out and voting. So I really appreciate all of the speakers today. We covered a wide gamut of topics related to housing justice. And while these topics are all different, we can see the interconnectedness of them. So as I said, would love to have questions from our audience here. So please raise your hand if one comes to you. But to start off with, I'd just like to go through and ask everyone who's spoken today, if you could share an action that you'd like the people who are, the 31 people who are on this call to take after they get off the call, what would that action be or way to get involved in your work? And anyone can take it away.
We are in the process of our 5-year strat plan for addressing housing needs in Anchorage. A part of that, we're also talking about what emergency shelter looks like. The municipality of Anchorage is really struggling to provide humane emergency shelter that has things like laundry services or privacy when showering. And so if you have any time to give public comment on our strat plan, or emergency shelter, there's some upcoming engagements, and those are on our website, which I'll put in the chat. We would love an email reiterating kind of what you believe should be an emergency shelter in a 5-year plan to address housing needs. Those comments will become a part of the plan and also be presented to the policymakers who can control the funding and require certain aspects to be maintained within emergency shelter. Ideally, we would love housing. We know we need about 2,700 units in Anchorage right now. That's not going to happen. So in the meantime, we want really wise investments and thoughtful comments. ACH.org. Is it Anchored Home? I'll put it in the chat when I find it.
I can pop in. I think biggest thing is just share information about clean energy homes and about the rebates that are upcoming, and both like now so people can start planning and can start organizing within their communities. And then also as more information goes out, just make sure as many people as possible know what opportunities are available to weatherize and electrify their homes.
I would say as an action item, just get involved if you can. I think a lot of times people think that it needs to be some like big grand gesture to make a difference, but that's not the case. There's so many ways to get involved in your community at a local level and learn what's happening in real time, and then you're able to advocate from a place of like experience and knowledge as opposed to just like general thoughts, because good intentions don't mean much in practical terms, but just a little bit of human kindness and making those connections, we are so much stronger together, but we have to actually be together to do that work.
And I just want to add, I think an action for everyone here is like really cultivate capacity to feel uncomfortable feelings and then check them. I think that's a whole big process here about we're trained for like looking for comfort and looking for stuff instead of I think about building our resilience, building our own capacity to withstand uncomfortable sensations and feelings. And I think one of the really places it shows up is how we listen to each other. We have to listen and listen again and listen again. And a lot of times stories are not translatable into words, and you have to like listen in your whole body and see things. And that's like a whole capacity building. So that's my suggestion.
Thanks, Terry. I would actually like to pick up on that thread because we've heard from Terry, we've heard from Mindy, we've heard from Hannah, how crucial that listening piece is, and that if we want to be having real solutions, it has to be the people closest to the problem experiencing them that's giving that solution. So I wonder if either you, Terry, or Hannah would like to add about the listening piece and any advice around that.
I'm finding that like I have to do this kind of double job here about holding myself and holding the other, because what I'm trying to build is a connected betweenness. And we live in a culture doesn't recognize the value of betweenness. It doesn't value and understand how important relationships are. Because we're built in a mechanical world, but living in a complex system. And so that's the piece there around I'm holding myself and I'm noticing how I'm feeling when I'm listening to somebody else. And I have to sit with those uncomfortable feelings. And I think that's the hard part. It's like we just want to blurt out how we feel instead of like sitting with, because my feeling might not be about that person at all. And that's the thing to really interrogate.
I'd for sure like to build off exactly what Terry was just saying. People are the authority in their own lives. And I think oftentimes, we want to be so helpful that we will give a lot of suggestions, or we have, again, these preconceived notions of what's going on. So being able to be uncomfortable, being able to sit with the fact that you may not know the answer, or horribly every day, at least in my experience, you don't have an answer in the moment, you can't fix it. We're not here to fix anybody. People don't need fixing. There's a problem at large with resources being denied to people for like all these reasons, but like they're not the problem. I always say this all the time: people are not the problem. People are not a problem, right? They're living inside of one. So and that's hard. I think, oftentimes we have just the way that our society works. We want to have answers. We want to be helpful. We want to be proactive. But building community a lot of times is just recognizing one's own not knowing of things, and that's okay. But that does take resiliency, and that does take like undoing a lot of again, back to white supremacy, right? We love perfectionism. We love to be like the smartest one in the room. But like, what is smart even, right? So unlearning and detangling all that, it's a process that will last the rest of our lives and let us find joy and discomfort in that.
So many gems in that. Between this, the people are not the problem, we're living in the problem. And Owen just pointed out that systems need reimagining and rebuilding, not the people. I think we're all on the same page here about that. So in our remaining minutes, this is a huge question. So, if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But my question is, how do we aim at those systemic problems, or how are we aiming at those systemic problems when it comes to housing justice? Yes.
I
Can't
would say
repeat.
something. Um,
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, I actually have a sort of a pondering and a question here. Because on the one hand, we're saying that we don't have enough housing in Alaska, and I think in some places that is certainly true, but in other places, I know of people who are two individuals living in a 5-bedroom house. How can we fix this? What about multi-generational housing? What about family housing? Like, I know that overcrowding is a problem on the one hand, but on the other hand, I think in our modern commercialized, industrialized culture, we have focused too much on individualism, and like everyone needs to have their own house. Within that house, everyone needs to have their own room. And I don't think those are truths. I think those are cultural preferences. And there have been articles and studies about how having too much personal space is really driving families apart. So I wonder about, like, we have these big houses that are being underutilized. We have elders who are being sent to elder care homes, or who are living in their own spaces who don't necessarily need to, and it may not actually be the best thing for them. And then we have people who don't have enough housing or enough space in their houses. So this seems like the resources are already there. It's just about distributing them. And I'm not really sure that what kind of a solution comes out of that, but it's something that I think about often.
I agree with what you're talking about multi-generational homes and like the health that can bring to young people and old people. When we talk about overcrowding from our perspective, I'm thinking about when there's like 6 families in a house and the teenagers are sleeping in shifts by a stove in the kitchen, and the stove is the heating source for the whole house. And that kind of overcrowding, I think, is really hard on everyone. And if it's a choice, it's a choice. And if it's because there's not available housing or insulated housing, then that's a different thing. And then it's just really expensive to build in places like that. Whereas the places that have these big houses that are kind of half empty, it is less expensive to build, and people staying where they want to be or in the community they want to be in feels really important too. So it's like so complicated. There is yes, and this kind of like, how do we address both of those things is, I guess, that uncomfortable place to sit in that we named.
Yeah, I would just see like one of the big interesting factors is that we don't have a cultural understanding of community, and an understanding that if we deny people shelter, we're like killing them. You know, we're like hurting them by not offering aid. And all this personal choice thing is like a thing about the idea that we're separate. And it's coming from the idea that we're separate and responsible for ourselves. And if somebody else doesn't have whatever it is, then it's their responsibility and they're to blame. And like that is a whole really interesting inside of Western thinking is screwed up. And it's like, this is like, how are we going to fix the, you know, psychotic nature of our like dominant culture that we all participate in? What part of ourselves has that psychosis going? And then why don't we like liberate ourselves from that and get well? And I go back to wild variety. Oh, well, we have to have a well forest to be well ourselves. We are interdependent. And I think that's a part of the capacity building of like, I'm living with discomfort with like being overcrowded where I live. And one of us doesn't know how to communicate with the rest of us, or we don't understand how to communicate with them. So like communication is a really important feature, and community practice of communication is a practice. So like, how do we go and cultivate that sense of like harboring our neighbor? When I go back to biblical history there, it's like, that's a sacred duty. And we're supposed to be a Christian country, and I don't understand that. No, of course, nobody reads the full Bible anyway, so it's okay. I'm not saying nobody. I know a lot of people are scholars and all that. But I'm going to stop right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, we are winding down. We only have about 3 minutes left. I do want to point out Dylan's comment or question in the chat. Dylan, do you maybe want to come off mute and express it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for letting me ask something real quick. I want to type it out before it left my mind. But yeah, I think to your question, especially too, about how can we restructure systems? I think a part of that I'm always trying to think about is how to restructure and change discourses that potentially hold really small scale homeowners, the people most exploited by the industries that are actually responsible for the biggest parts of climate change and energy use. How can we restructure that discourse to actually hold those larger contributors accountable and yeah, not excuse these structures that we talk about, colonialism, capitalism, white supremacy?
Thank you. Thanks for adding that. It's great to hear from everybody in the room too. And so I am going to begin to close us out. I'm going to ask a little bit of a hard question, which for the panelists is, what is one word that you would like to send us away with? One word that you would like us to keep on our minds as we go about the rest of our day. I see the brain wheels turning. When you find your word, go ahead, Terry.
I'll leave you all with a song. Mother Earth loves you, this I know, for the mountain told me so. Mother Earth loves you, this I know, for the mountain told me so. Just out there for all you. Connect to the earth. She'll always listen.
Deani, Owen, do you have a word perhaps you'd like to share? It looks like a no. That's okay.
The first word that came to my mind is pleasure, and I don't know, I don't want to add anything because I don't know what to say about it. But that was the word that popped into my mind, is pleasure.
Thank you.
Gratitude's always good.
Aurora, Gabby, Hannah.
I'd go with dream. I think much like what Owen said, I believe we dream of a better future. We'll keep that in our hearts.
Thank you.
Similar to Hannah, imagine popped into my head.
Gabby, you get the last word if you want it.
Oh, wow. I will close this out with hope.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for coming today and all the interaction. I really, really appreciate you being here and being present. And we'll see you next time.